Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lavender and Lace. I'm Alicia, and today's video is all about Christmas crafts. And I do have a special guest crafter today with a feature project in today's video. And I hope you enjoy all of these projects that are in the video today. And I hope they inspire you to get started with your Christmas crafting early and just give you some ideas and things to be on the lookout for. And if you enjoy just farmhouse DIYs and thrift flips, things like that, I hope you consider subscribing to this channel. Give this video a thumbs up, and let's get started with the crafts. For this first project, I picked up this sign at my local thrift store, and as soon as I saw this, I knew what I wanted to do with it. So the first thing I did was just took one of my Cricut tools and removed the letters from the front. They had just used some small finishing nails to hold down the letters as well, so I just took a hammer and made sure those were flush with the surface. I took my sanding block and just removed any residual glue or wood left over from the letters so I would have a smooth surface to paint. I went around all of the edges with some washi tape to make sure I didn't get any paint on them. And I used some of the Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster for my sign, and this did take 2 coats to get complete coverage. And I went over where it says memories are made in this 3 times actually to get that completely covered. I took one of my smaller chip brushes and just used some of the antique wax from Waverly and just gave this piece some distressing. I didn't like how shiny the metal was on the top of this wood piece, and I decided to go over that with some of the antique wax as well, which I wind up covering a little bit later on, so you guys let me know if you think I should have just left it with the distressing on there or if you like it the way that I ended up doing it. I found this cut file that I really liked on Creative Fabrica, and I just cut that out with my Cricut Maker. And I like to use the paper transfer tape when I have any painted project or surface. It just helps not to pull up the paint when I remove that. And I just applied my design and made sure to burnish that down really well. I carefully peeled back my transfer tape, and I like to keep that as close to the surface as possible and kind of just wiggle that back and forth as I'm removing it from the vinyl. And this design had some areas that were pretty small, so I was careful in those specific spots so I wouldn't pull those up. And I just repeated those steps to get my text on the sign. This is where I changed my mind about what I wanted to do with the top of this sign. I had some moss left over from previous projects and spring decor, so I put that down to see if I liked the way that looked. And I also had some raffia, and I was just trying to decide which one that I liked better. I thought the raffia looked the best on the top of this nativity, and it did come in bundles, and I cut those apart and got smaller pieces to make that easier to glue on, and just used some hot glue and one of these little spatulas from the Dollar Tree to get that in place. I also went back in and just added some smaller pieces of that moss in different areas on top, and I just thought that gave that another texture, and I really like the way that it looks. To finish off my nativity, I just added some fairy lights to the top. I just wove those in and out of the raffia and just secured the battery pack on the back, and this was ready to display. I had a couple of these really cute barns that I had picked up at the Dollar Tree back around Valentine's Day. And just to start this project, I carefully removed the top piece from each barn, and very carefully because this was paper, so it would tear very easily. I painted each of my barns with some Waverly chalk paint. One was the color crimson and the other the color plaster, and both of these took 2 coats to cover up the design that was originally there. And if I had to do this project over again, I would make sure to remove that paper that was on the front and just give this a good sanding before painting. For my red barn, I just went in with a ruler and a pencil and just put down some lines. I thought this would give the barn a little bit more detail and make it look more realistic. I love to distress my pieces to give me that farmhouse vibe, and for this project, I just went around all of the edges with my sanding block. I lightly went over the front of the barn as well just to rough up the surface a bit. I took some small popsicle sticks and just cut off the ends, and I cut 2-inch pieces and 1-inch pieces. And for this project, I needed 5 of the 2-inch size and 2 of the 1-inch size. I took some hot glue and just glued the roof portion back down before I started adding all of the other extra details and decorations. I placed down the pieces for my window and the door and just did a dry fit before gluing those down. I have this pack of Farmhouse rub-on transfers that I got from Amazon, and I will see if I can find the link to those and leave it in the description box. And I found one that would fit perfectly in the doorway of the barn, and I just used one of my Cricut burnishing tools to get that in place. The backing for my transfer was super sticky, so it did just pull up a small area of the paint, and I just went back in with a detail brush and some more of the crimson chalk paint and just touched that up. Now for the fun part of this project. I found a couple of things that I really liked in the miniature section at Hobby Lobby. These string lights and also a 4-pack of miniature wreaths, and I just added the lights to the roof of the barn and the wreath to the window and just using some hot glue to put those down. For my second barn, I had a different decoration idea in mind for this one, and to start that process, I just put down a light coat of Mod Podge. I grabbed a piece of printer paper and some tissue paper, and I just placed that printer paper down and just went around the edges with some scissors and sized my tissue paper to fit. I cut my tissue paper just a little bit bigger than the printer paper, and that just gives me an edge to tape down. And one thing to remember if you do this technique, you'll want to make sure that you're printing on the matte side of the tissue paper and not the shiny side. Just go around all of your edges with washi tape or something just so that holds down while it's going through your printer. I have an inkjet printer, so when I print on tissue paper, I do like to let that dry for at least 30 minutes, longer if I have the time, and then I just carefully peeled back the washi tape and removed the printer paper from the tissue paper. I cut out around my design and I tried to get as close to the image as possible and not leave a lot of that white space showing. That just helps when you apply your image to your project. I love this image and I thought it was super cute and a perfect fit for this project. And I just centered that on the barn and used a Teflon sheet as a protective covering. And I used my little Cricut mini press to iron that onto the surface. The heat just reactivates that Mod Podge and allows you to put down an image of your choosing, and I like to start in the center and work my way out to the edges. I took a small chip brush once again and the antique wax from Waverly and just went all around the image and on top of the image. That just helps blend it into the background a little bit better and you're not able to see the seam. To protect my artwork, I just went back over the image with another light coat of Mod Podge. This just helps to seal it in really well, and it also helps to blend in those edges too. I don't have a lot of Christmas picks left in my stash from last year, but I had one that I thought would work well for this project, and I just cut off some smaller pieces that would be the right size for my barn, and I just used some hot glue and glued those to the top. I just made some simple shoelace bows with some ribbon and jute twine to glue into the greenery, and I just used hot glue once again and put those down. I just trimmed off the ends of my ribbon and jute twine, and these barns are ready to go up with my Christmas decorations this year.
Hello everyone, I'm Gracelyn and I am the guest crafter, and as you can see we are just staining a palette that I got from Dollar Tree. After your sign is stained, I just took these snowflakes and I used some white chalk paint from Waverly to just paint them white. Now I'm just tracing on 2 circles. I used some jar lids, a small one and a big one, to just make the circles as round as I could possibly get them. After I traced on the design of my circles, I went back in with the Waverly Snow White chalk paint and I filled in the circles. So I did decide to go in with a second coat of white, and I am just tracing on the design for a hat for my snowman. So after I traced on the hat design, I took the Waverly ink and I just painted in the lines of that hat and made it a black, nice little hat. So I decided that he would get cold without a little scarf, so I traced on a scarf for him to wear. So I just took the Waverly Crimson Red and I painted inside the lines of his scarf. And I did have to do maybe a few coats because it was a very light red, so just be aware of that. So I just took out that black paint again and I used a ball brush and I just made him some cute buttons to wear on his day out in the cold. Here I am adding some holly berries to his hat using the Waverly chalk paint in the crimson, again as I used for his scarf, and it's so cute with little holly berries. So once I got the berries painted on, I did take the Waverly chalk paint, color moss, and I did paint on some adorable little holly leaves. You can't have a snowman without a nose, so I just added a cute little carrot nose to my snowman. So I'm just taking a chalk couture transfer. It is a Christmas one, and I just fuzzed it and then I stuck it on there. My chalk paste I had used for my first attempt was dried out and I had to use another one, but the second attempt was so much better. So this was the dried out chalk paste. It just looks terrible and it would not spread, and so yeah, I did have to switch because it did not work at all. So I did just end up adding one snowflake to the top right corner while the chalk couture transfer was drying because I did have to wash it before I could do my second attempt. So this is my second attempt with the chalk couture and it turned out so much better than before. Oh my goodness, I just love how this project turned out, and I hope you guys did too. Thank you for watching my craft.
I've been on the hunt for some more galvanized metal containers to add to my Christmas decor this year, and I found this one at my local thrift store, and it was just too shiny for me. I knew I wanted to age that somehow, so I did a little bit of research and found a couple of techniques that I wanted to try. The first one was just to mix a quart of warm water with a half a cup of salt and spray that all over the surface. I left that on for 3 to 4 hours and I wasn't seeing any change, so I rinsed that off. Since the salt water didn't work, I moved on to the second technique that I had found, and the first thing I did was took a piece of sandpaper and just scratched up the surface. Then I just poured white vinegar into this container, and it only covered about half of this piece, so I left it sitting for about 45 minutes to an hour and just checked that to see if I was getting any change in the surface, and I just turned that over and repeated the process for the other side. And this is how it turned out after it was aged in the vinegar. I think it turned out great. I love how there's some rust spots in different areas and there's different textures to the metal. And I would definitely do this technique again. I really like this design with the Christmas trees, and I just cut that out with my Cricut, and I made sure to reverse weave for this stencil and just applied that to my bucket with some transfer tape. I had some of the centers of the letters pull up when I removed the transfer tape, so I just went back in with my pen tool and replaced those. I used some green and white acrylic paint for my design, and I just took one of my smaller foam pouncers and just went up and down in all of the areas that I wanted to cover, and I wasn't too worried about getting complete coverage as I want this to look rustic and vintage. I did do a couple of coats in green over the Christmas trees. I let the paint dry for about 5 minutes and then I started to carefully peel back that vinyl to reveal my design. The areas in the center of my design were a little bit harder to get that vinyl to peel up, but I just used some of my Cricut tools to help me with that and tried to be really careful not to smudge any of the paint. I think I did have some areas that there was a little bit of smudging, but that just added to the rustic look. I love using this pen tool to help me remove the centers of these letters, especially on smaller designs like this. I was really able to get in there and just get specifically where I needed to go with that, and it helped me just to pull up those pieces easily. I sprayed my bucket lightly with just some clear acrylic sealer. I wanted to be able to make sure that paint didn't chip or scratch off during storage. And here's how this one turned out. I just love this so much. I think it looks great. And it was just a very quick project, really, other than the aging and the vinegar. And it just looks super rustic and will be really great with my Christmas decorations this year. For this next project, I am just repurposing some old pillowcases that I've had laying around in my closet for a couple of years, and I just measured the area that I wanted to apply a design to. Then I went into Cricut Design Space and I just put in some rectangles and sized them to the area that I knew I wanted to have on my pillowcase. And I had already uploaded several images into Design Space and I just added those onto my canvas. And I did recolor things so I would be able to see them a little bit better on the screen, and just size those to each of the rectangles. And I did make sure to hide those before I went to cut out my images on my Cricut. And for this project, I did cut out 3 stencils using some Dollar Tree vinyl that I had, and I also cut out one in iron-on vinyl. I just reverse weeded all 3 of my stencils and also weeded out the design in the iron-on vinyl and got everything ready to apply to the pillowcases. Before applying my vinyl, I had ironed my pillowcases to get out most of the wrinkles, and then I just centered my vinyl on the pillowcase and got that ready to iron on, and I had preheated my Cricut press to 305 degrees and set that for 30 seconds. When using iron-on vinyl, be sure that you just follow the instructions for your particular one, and you always want to use a press cloth between your iron-on material and your Cricut press or your iron. So I always just keep this pillowcase on hand, and I just keep it with my vinyl, and it's just quick and easy to get to. I turned over my pillowcase and just gave a quick 15-second press per side on the back to make sure that was ironed on well. I carefully removed my carrier sheet, and if you do have areas that kind of peel up that didn't iron on in the first initial press, just put that back down and just go over it once again. And I do like to do a final press without the carrier sheet, but using that pillowcase again. This Dollar Tree vinyl worked great as a stencil. It weeded out really well. The only issue that I had was when I was cutting it out with my machine. I had to put the pressure on less pressure because it was cutting all the way through the backing as well. But it was still easy to get that on the transfer tape to apply those to my pillowcases. To prep my pillowcases before I applied the fabric paint, I ironed all of these and got the wrinkles out. I also used a scrap piece of cardstock in between the layers so the paint wouldn't seep through to the back. And I used the Elmer's Craft Bond spray adhesive. This just helps your stencil to stick down well and prevent any bleeding. I did do one of these pillowcases not on camera, and the paint seeped around the edges of my stencil. It still looks good, and I'll show you that one just a little bit later on. But be sure you use that adhesive, and I think that will just help prevent some of the bleeding around the edges of your stencil. I applied my stencil, and since I had used that spray adhesive, it stuck really well to my pillowcase. I just centered that and used my hands to smooth it out first, and then went back in with my little Cricut burnishing tool and made sure to get down any bubbles or areas that might not want to stick too well, and got that ready to apply the fabric paint. This is the first project that I have used this fabric paint for, and I was very happy with the results. It's the Tulip brand, and I picked it up at Walmart. I used one of my small foam pouncers again for this project, and I just went in with an up and down motion and just dabbed the paint on lightly. And at each cutout area, I tried to start on the edge and not directly in the center, and that just helps prevent bleeding. And this did take 2 coats of paint. I carefully removed my stencil, just working from the outside in, and this was a little challenging because it had stuck really well to the pillowcase. So I just tried to work carefully because the paint was still wet. I did not let it dry before I pulled up the stencil. So I tried to just remove that as carefully as possible and not lay that down on any other areas of the pillowcase where I didn't want the paint. And it just gave really clean lines, and I love the way this design turned out. And I just used a small pair of tweezers to remove the centers of the letters. Once all of my vinyl was removed, I just laid these aside and let them completely dry for 4 hours. So this was my first pillowcase that I did with the vinyl stencil and the fabric paint, and this one is the one that I did not use the adhesive spray to begin with, and you can just see how much bleeding there was around the edges of the stencil. The reindeer aren't very defined, but I still think this one will be cute to put out with my decorations. I hope you all have enjoyed the projects in today's video. I would love to know which one was your favorite, so leave me a comment. Please be sure that you subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up, and click that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. And I will see you guys in the next one.